Well, today is a special Sunday. In fact, it's a special weekend. It's been designated by the Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, which is Christian and Jewish and Muslim, Hindu, Baha'i, Buddhist, lots of different faith groups. It's been designated for the last number of years as a Criminal Justice Sabbath weekend. And it's supported, as I said, by all these different faith communities, and to my shame, we haven't really done much about this here at Good Sam in the past, but our outreach and social justice ministries asked if we could really keep this Sabbath this year and then build on it in the years to come. And of course, yeah. Criminal Justice Sabbath is, it's the time to remember our entire criminal justice system, both those who work within it, so law enforcement, of course, the judiciary, the legal system, those who work in state and federal prisons, the probation service, but also all those, the human beings, the men and women and children affected by crime and by the system that seeks to deal with it, both victims and those who've been convicted. And it's very easy to see this as, there are two sides. There are the victims and then there are the perpetrators. But actually, when you think about it, we're all human beings together and we're trying to figure this out together as a society. And honestly, I don't know much about criminal justice system. I know that every time I drive past Salem, of course, there's the Oregon State Penitentiary, and to my shame, I had to look it up on the internet because I didn't know the name of that institution. But I've driven past it hundreds, probably thousands of times. And I don't give it a second thought, but there are over 2,000 inmates in that prison at any one time. I was also interested, any guesses as to when the state prison, Oregon State Prison, was founded? I'll give you a clue. The state was founded in 1859, state of Oregon. When do you think the state penitentiary was opened? 1860, okay. Any other guesses? 1858? 1851. 8 years before we became a state, we had a state prison. All right, good, okay. There are victims of crime. Of course there are. In 2016, there were 1.2 million violent crimes in America, and there were over 10 million arrests made by the police across our nation, both federal and state and local and Indian nations. And there are over 2.3 million people incarcerated in state and federal prisons. That's 2016 figures. Some of us, I know, have been victims of crime over the years. You may have been robbed, burglary, assault, a vehicle incident. One of the most common these days is to have your credit card or personal information taken and then used. We've been through this multiple times with people from all over the country getting a hold of our credit card information, and that's annoying as well as troubling. And of course the impact of crime is not just for the individuals involved, it's for their families and the trauma, and sometimes the trauma can last a lifetime, particularly if it's violent. But of course, the other part of the equation is those who are convicted. They're taken out of their home situations, which means that the family loses usually a wage earner, a father, a mother, a brother, a child, and that affects the entire family as well. And most state prisons, so most people are incarcerated. 85 to 90% of all prisoners are incarcerated in state prisons. Federal is only a very small amount. And state prisons are usually put in remote places out of the way, usually in communities like, say, Pendleton or Oregon or Ontario, that kind of need an economic boost. And so families, because most of the crimes in Oregon, of course, are committed in the Portland metro area, it's an enormous hardship for families to be able to go and visit loved ones in central or eastern Oregon. Well, I did a bit more digging, and this is really kind of fascinating in a disturbing way. The United States, so these are 2016 figures, and all these statistics come from the Department of Justice. In 2016, the United States had 4.4% of the world's entire population. So 4.4% of the world's population lived in the United States. We had over 21% of all people incarcerated in the world. We have the largest prison population in the world by total numbers and also in terms of per head of population. Guess which country is the closest to us? We're far out in the lead, but guess which country is closest to us? Actually, there are 4, so you've got a clue. You've got more than one chance. Not China, not North Korea. Russia, yes, is the closest to us. El Salvador, Cuba, Turkmenistan. Great neighbors to have for those statistics. Out of the prison population, 40% are black, African American, 39% are white, and 19% are of Hispanic origin. Of course, they're white as well, but we count them differently. Our total population for African Americans in this country is 13%. So African Americans make up 13% of our population, but they make up 40% of the population of our jails. Whites make up 64%, but they make up 39%. Hispanics, 16%, they make up 19%. And then I was sort of thinking, well, how much does this all cost? California, 2016, spent on average $47,000 per person in jail per year. They have space for roughly 100,000 inmates in the state of California. Right now, they have 170,000. So you've probably seen pictures of inmates in the gyms and other places. One of the other outgrowths of prison overcrowding is that there's been the rise of private, for-profit prisons. In 1980, there were four for-profit prisons in this country. By 1990, there were over 100, and now there are multiple hundreds. And these are for-profit. These are owned by for-profit corporations. They make money out of our criminal justice system. In 2016, it was decided that we would start to, that the states and the federal government would start to remove prisoners from for-profit prisons because conditions were so appalling. But just this year, the Attorney General reversed that decision. How did we get to this point? Well, if you look before 1980, the prison population was fairly stable. So in other words, it just went up in parallel with our rising population. And then in the very early 80s, the prison population went up exponentially. I mean, like, you know, the curve just goes up through the decades, the 80s, the 90s, and into the early aughts, and you can probably guess the reason why. The war on drugs, right, the war on drugs. It became politically popular to be hard on crime, particularly drug offences, and so our prisons are filled with mostly low-level people who've been convicted of some part of low-level drug offences. And also being hard on crime, again, was seen as politically expedient. So things like mandatory sentencing, 3 strikes and you're out in California, and taking away the power of judges to exercise discretion in cases. And so judges, you ask judges today, their hands are very much more tied now than before the early 80s in taking a person's specific circumstances into consideration when passing sentence. We're all individuals, and we all have different stories. But judges are less and less able today than they were 30 years ago to be able to exercise their discretion. 2008 was the peak of the prison population. It started to go down under the last administration. We started to release prisoners who, for drug offences, at least from the federal system, who were deemed not to be a threat to society. But even today, 1 in 110 Americans is incarcerated. So out of every 110 people in our population, 1 person is in jail. There are over 4.7 million people on probation. That's 1 in every 51 Americans. And when you add all of it up, everyone who is currently in the system in one way, shape, or form, 1 in every 35 Americans is currently in the justice system. I'm not suggesting, I don't know what to do. I'm not telling you to do anything, but I think part of the reason to have this criminal justice Sabbath is just to make me more aware of what is being done to quote-unquote keep me safe, or is being done quote-unquote in my name, the name all of us, the American people. If you would like to know more about what the Episcopal Church is doing here in the state of Oregon, please do be in touch with me, and I will pass you on to Deacon Tom English, who is a deacon down in St. Mary's and has been involved in prison chaplaincy and prison ministries for many, many years. And we do, as a diocese, support the criminal justice Sabbath and have done so for a number of years. And we do have prison ministries in every state prison in our state. In fact, in Ontario, there's a new congregation has formed, and I'm blanking on the name, I apologize, but Jim Mosier, who's the priest at the Episcopal Church in Ontario, they've always had a lively Episcopal ministry there, and just this year, the Episcopal inmates formed together and have started a new church. And they've just been accepted as a mission church in the Diocese of Eastern Oregon. So, yeah. And I guess the call for me is to find out more, and is certainly to pray. To pray and remember, and not just drive past on I-5 and not give it a second thought. Let me leave you with 2 scriptures. And it's interesting that Jesus mentions prisoners and release from prison many times in the New Testament, and 2 scriptures come to my mind. First of all is Jesus' kind of public entry into his ministry from the Gospel of Luke. You remember at the beginning of Luke's Gospel, after the birth narratives, Jesus comes to his hometown, as we heard in Mark's Gospel, and he's there in the synagogue in Capernaum, in Nazareth, and he opens the scroll, and it's from Isaiah, and Jesus says, The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, to preach good news to the poor and release to the captives. And then asked about discipleship, Jesus said, "Whatever you do for the least of these, my sisters and brothers, you do for me." And one of the things he asks us to do is to visit those in prison. And those are the scriptures that come to mind for me. Sabbath. Sabbath. Amen.